quick message before we start. We hope our conversations open up new perspectives and new ideas for our listeners, and our goal is to be informative. But we want to emphasize that this isn't a substitute for individual therapy, and we're not providing medical or psychological advice here. If you feel moved by what you hear, and if you want to explore it more deeply, or if there's something in your life you'd like to work on, please reach out to an LGBTQ affirming therapist online or in your area. You'll be glad you did.
Welcome to the Psych Out Podcast, where two psychology nerds get psyched up for LGBTQ affirming history, research, and practice. And now your hosts, Jen and Chris.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Jen. I'm here talking with my awesome colleague, Chris.
Hey there.
And today we're going to talk about they, them pronouns, which we both have intimate experience with since both of us use those pronouns in various contexts. And Chris, do you want to introduce yourself just a little bit?
Of course. My name's Chris Dobbins, and I'm a master's student studying clinical psychology and LGBTQ affirmative therapy, and soon to be a trainee therapist.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'm a therapist in private practice, psychologist in private practice who primarily sees LGBTQ and especially trans and gender expansive clients, and especially young folks. So at the same time, I think this is also a topic that we have lived experience with. But I want to talk a little bit about the importance of they, them pronouns first. There's, I think we both want to set this out before we talk about the history and sort of problematize how it works on the ground. There is really ample research showing that using the pronoun that a person asks you to use is incredibly supportive to their mental health and can massively reduce the risk of suicidal ideation and actual suicide attempt.
Absolutely.
Right.
And you and I just before pod were talking about, is this a small thing or is it a big thing? And I think what's interesting to me about something like pronouns, something like neopronouns or they, them is, in the broad scheme of things, we so often feel powerless about what we can do to build a stronger community, build better alliances, foment political change in a moment where it's increasingly difficult to imagine how anything like that would work. This is such a small thing in that scheme. But as we're going to talk about, grammatically, cognitively, changing language that you may or may not have used for your entire life, however long lived that may be, that's a difficult thing. So it's a small ask and it's a big ask at the same time.
Yeah, well put. And I think, I don't think it's incumbent upon everybody to hold that space for people to, everybody hates that phrase now. I'm sorry.
But you're right. It can be a big ask, but that holding space for that is not what everyone needs to do. I agree.
Right. Okay. So let me come up with a better phrase. We're not talking about wicked, y'all. So at least we're not being totally silly. But it's important to give the opportunity for people who are struggling with that to work through it, because for some people and for most of us, actually changing language is a big ask, while also putting it in the context of how important it is. Right. And you're right. How, as compared to, say, changing the political climate, this is a really direct thing that as an individual you can do that has a very big impact compared to the work that you put into it. So yeah, we have to hold both of those.
Yeah. And we can ask people to do this work. We can invite them to do this work. We can understand that it may be a great challenge for them. And we can also set up our own boundaries around that. I've really enjoyed seeing the norm evolving over just the past few years of people doing a lot of education around if you mess up someone's pronouns.
Yeah,
people people doing this education around if you mess up, please just apologize as briefly as possible and move on. Do not center yourself. Don't, it's not a big thing. What makes it a big thing is you making it a big thing.
Right. I think where and I want to be clear also, like I said, like this is not incumbent upon you as an individual who uses they, them pronouns, although I do think it's helpful advice depending on the environment that you're in. Like you don't owe anybody that, right? But I'm talking about like as a professional who works with family members and works with community members and just as people who are encountering this discourse in the world. That's why we want to talk about this in a little bit more of a complex way while also emphasizing like, this is so important. This is so important. And I can tell you, like I use they, them pronouns depending on the environment that I'm in, which is also super valid, y'all. And there are people who I really push back on about it and people who I don't, based on my own like personal preferences for how to live my life. Mm-hmm. And I have found it very useful to be able to like talk to people about it in a bit more of a way that acknowledges that there is that it is an ask, right? While also like demanding like the basic decency toward me of calling me what I ask you to call me. So, you know, we like to hold, like stand on both sides of a question sometimes in this podcast, and we're going to do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like there is a range of pushback, right? From like I'm bumbling and I say sorry very briefly and I move on, right? Like there's that. And I do that. I want to like I do this for a friggin' living and I do that sometimes, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later on. All the way to like just really cruel, malignant, like even politically charged pushback on they, them pronouns. Like they become a lightning rod for political issues and deep emotional issues, right?
Yeah. And even the word pronoun becomes deeply politicized in a way where you have to be plugged into the political environment to understand that when someone is saying, you know, is using pronouns, like they don't mean the grammatical part of speech. They are specifically attacking people who use, you know, neopronouns, who use they, them. I mean, really use pronouns in a queer context.
Right. I mean, like pay attention to, is this a person who actually has true passion and love for like formal grammar, right? Or is this a person who is using that as a code for attacking the people who care about it, right?
Yeah.
And I'll give an example. Like I have a story about someone who encountered a therapist and told them what their pronouns were. And the therapist said, I'm a linguist before I'm a therapist. And so I refuse to use them, right? Like, really? Is this person a linguist? Really? Probably not, right? Probably not. And a lot of these people who are saying these things, if you listen to their discourse, just like all the rest of us, we don't talk according to formal grammar rules.
No,
we don't do that. So yeah, I agree. Like they're on one side of this issue that should not be a debate, but one side of this question is pushback that is disingenuous and done in bad faith.
Yeah.
Right.
And I will say, you've told me that story and I just, it makes me so mad.
I know. It's so ridiculous too.
Yeah. It's something that popped into my head that I'll say to like a theoretical person who can imagine themselves having a similar reaction is like, really check in with yourself. Like, is there any other circumstance that therapist would have said, I am a linguist before I'm a therapist? Is that something that comes up often in the room, or is that an ad hoc justification that they came up with?
Right.
In a context where they were encountering a queer person and they felt uncomfortable about that person's queerness. Like,
right.
I think it was,
or about changing their language. And I will, or right.
Yeah.
And they are really connected.
Yeah.
And that I actually want to bring up the history of that a little bit, if this feels like a good time for that, Chris.
Absolutely.
All right. We got a little note from our producer, then they should make linguists their profession. Yes, I would. If you're a therapist, you should never be a linguist before you are a therapist. That is not your calling.
Yep.
Don't be a therapist if that is the case, right? Like we get to have other things we care about, but when we're working with a client, unless that is not one of the ones that should outweigh our work with the client. What the heck?
That would be a poor thing to say at a professional conference and a downright wrong thing to say to a client in session.
Yeah. All right. But let's not give that one person any more energy. I want to talk a little bit about the history of this debate about pronouns. And I read this wonderful book that I really want to highly recommend, which is, the mirroring's going to be weird, but I'm going to read it. What's Your Pronoun? Beyond He and She by Dennis Barron. And this is really about the history of this like third person gender neutral pronoun in the English language. And he talks about neopronouns a lot, which we're not going to talk about today. It's a wonderful and important issue, but like it's a minority of people who are using gender neutral or non-binary pronouns. A vast minority are using neopronouns at this point. So we're focusing on they, them because we only have so much time. But if you're really interested in those, this is a great, great book to learn about them. I really highly recommend it.
And also, I think that that's something neopronouns would deserve an entire other episode on their own.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to say, like, I friggin' adore neopronouns. I don't use them myself, but I adore them because it's really about like the way that we play with gender and the way we play with language. And language is a wonderful playground. And I just adore when people are engaging in that, right? So yes, they absolutely deserve their own episode. But the whole first half of this book, like I think the whole first half of this book really, I think, is taken up by a chapter or two. And one of the chapters is called The Politics of He. Right before we talk about they, we have to talk about he. And that's because this like debate over gender neutral pronoun for individuals and for like people, like when you don't know who the person is, has been around for hundreds of years. And one of them is like the idea, which is not actually a forever idea in English, but came up about the 17th, 18th century, that the gender neutral pronoun we should use when we're referring to everybody or when we're referring to like an individual who we don't know yet should be he, right? Or he or she, but usually he. Right. And this was so political that the use of gender neutral he in laws, especially around voting, were used against women trying to get voting rights. So if the law like benefited the people in power, then he meant everybody. And if it didn't, then he only meant men.
Yeah.
So this has been political for a long time. And the politics are actually not, and this, we're going to say this so many times in this podcast, the politics are not just about queerness. They're about misogyny.
That's true. That's true. We talked a lot about queerness in the opening section of this podcast, but yes, this is something that I came up with understanding as a feminist issue. It was discussed in my family in that context.
Yeah.
And you'll find a lot of discourse that I was exposed to in like the late 80s, early 90s, talking about it extensively in those terms. And that has a long tradition.
We had to fight for gender neutral they. Yeah. Before queerness became involved, we had to fight for gender neutral they. But this is a side note, but like this is how much we need to understand language changes and that changes in language are meaningful. And that is going like all the way back to when England was occupied by Vikings and our pronouns that we used in English at that point. I don't know why I'm saying our, those weren't my ancestors, but like the pronouns used in English technically distinguished genders, but actually like in spoken language, which most people didn't read, sounded exactly the same. And so they borrowed those pronouns from the invaders, the enemies in their country. And like, we can hypothesize that was not a non-political choice to make either.
But the utility of it was so valued that it shone through a variety of strongly felt political objections.
Exactly. Also, I kind of knew this, but didn't know I knew this. You used to be exclusively a plural pronoun. And it's only a couple centuries ago that we let go of thee, them, thee, and thou as our singular pronouns. Like, so when you read Shakespeare and there's a bunch of thee and thous, like that's normal. And it's actually, we use it now as like formal, like froofy speech. But that was actually the like more casual thing. And if you wanted to be like really formal to like a great lord or a noble, you would say you the same way we use like the like singular we or us for like a monarch. Right. You was plural.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So like if you were like a peasant and like a high noble knight came by, then you might say you for them. But most of the time, for almost everybody in your life, you would use thee and thou. So we have had like much more massive pronoun changes happen in our language over the course of, hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if English is multiple thousands of years, so I'll just say hundreds. I'll back that up. I'll say hundreds. And so like it's always been political. And so it's really important to look at how this is not all about queerness. In fact, I would say it's not actually mostly about queerness, at least not historically.
Yeah.
It's about how uncomfortable language change makes us, despite it being an inevitable thing. Like I get annoyed with young people's like slang, even though like the slang that I grew up with was slang that annoyed the previous, right? So like it's emotional and it's political and it is packed with meaning for all of us. And also it's about pushback against queerness, right? At the same time, it's always political on some level.
Yeah.
But that tells me we've been through this fight before many, many times. We've been through this. We've been through this language change and having to push for this language change for the sake of people living their best lives. We've been here before.
Yeah.
Right.
I think when I was first discovering what they them pronouns meant to me, I loved them. I really felt affirmed by hearing them, but I had a real frustration about exactly this the need for this discourse and the desire for this discourse of like grounding it in a historical precedent and having to argue that it's grammatical. But I think what we're talking about here is like the way that this goes in the way it's always been political.
Yeah.
It goes in cycles, and we almost forget how political this quarter of our language can be. And I think learning more about the history of how political it's been and how this is an ongoing conversation, but not quite a, continuous din of conversation about pronouns has helped me understand like how interesting and how necessary it is to continue the political act of advocating for change in language and saying that it's going to happen. So we should learn how and why we're okay with it and how we can help it along.
Absolutely. So like, when we started out with the idea of like, say, using they and them for a person who asks you is important and it's big. It's not just important and big for that one person. Mm-hmm. It's important and big for the way that the English language allows for people to exist as themselves. It's that big, and you are doing that big a thing by adding your voice to that change, right? I will also say, though, knowing that history about the gender neutral they, them, which is actually relatively recent, as recent as my and your lifetime, which y'all can just guess how long that is. When I'm talking to older people who are frustrated with it, I need to remember, because a lot of what I'll say, like one of my pat responses is, well, you use they, them for individuals all the time, just when you don't know what their gender is. And that's really true. If I say like, oh, wow, I have a really great orthopedist, someone might say, oh, what's their name? Mm-hmm. Right? Like they probably won't say what's his name or his or her name, in part because his or her is friggin' clunky. And we have already fought the fight of not assuming that doctors are men. So I will say that, and that is true. But actually for older folks, that's not as intuitive as we'd like to think it is. Yeah. It really isn't. And also it ignores the real cognitive challenge of making it be about someone who you have seen and talked to and heard. Mm-hmm. That is a different linguistic and cognitive challenge. And I think I have underplayed that in a way that does not serve myself or the people I love or the clients I care about.
At LGBTQ Evolutions, we know that change starts with people like you. Every act of kindness, every dollar, and every moment of your time brings us closer to removing the barriers that prevent our friends and family from being themselves. Together, we can create a brighter, more compassionate future for our community. Donate today with the link below.
I know we didn't do too much research into the cognitive side of things, but do you have anything that you can add to like why that is so difficult as a change?
Oh, do I? Oh, do I? Yes, I do.
Please.
I could do deeper research into the actual neurobiology of this, but I'm going to use like some like sort of basic ideas, right? Like our language processing, both receptive and expressive, is not something we're consciously doing, right? We very unconsciously say, hear the sound of a voice and attach pronouns to it. If we were intentional in our processing of language about everything, we would like not function, because everything we said, we would have to like really think through. Like language wouldn't exist because we would just our minds would be blown by how much work that is, right? And you know, one of the phrases we use in psychology a lot is what fires together wires together, right? If you spend your entire lifetime, decades upon decades, associating certain appearances, certain sounds, certain like ways of being with a person with certain pronouns, separating them is really hard. And it's really hard with an individual, and it's really hard conceptually, right? When we misgender someone, if we're doing it in good faith, it's usually incredibly unconscious, right? Because we have built, literally physically built neural pathways from one thing to another, like a sound to a pronoun without knowing it. And the pathway of that sound to a different pronoun or not knowing the pronoun, we got to work to grow.
Yeah.
Right? Like a path in the woods that you have traveled many times.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say we could do an entire different like podcast series about the way we talk about mind and body as distinction. And that is a topic that is well outside of our scope. But if it helps you, and it helps me, remember that like we are talking about physical changes in the brain. The wires that are firing are literal wires that are being constructed and are shooting out electricity that is being caught by other physical structures in your brain ad infinitum. Like physical changes have to happen in order for you to get better at doing something in that intuitive, not thinking about it way that you're speaking to, Jen.
Exactly. You're overcoming decades of programming, which means you have to work at it. Yeah. I mean, that's what we're really like coming to is you have to work at it. And I will say, like, I, as a non-binary person, have to work at it. Like, I have the same cognitive conditioning as everybody else in my culture who speaks my language, right?
Likewise.
Yeah, we have to work at it. So some of the ways that I do that, first of all, you use third person pronouns most often when the person is not in the room, right? Most often. You can use them. You also do sometimes use them with them there. But so look, I just used a gender neutral pronoun for an unknown person. I just did that.
Fancy that.
Right. But most often we're using those pronouns when the person is not in the room. So make sure if you want to use the right pronoun face to face, that you're using that pronoun in the room. I mean, when they're not in the room. And that is even more so about they, them than it is about any other pronoun. And I'm gonna call out our producer here for like good reasons. I have noticed the effort that he makes and he does this around like not knowing a person's gender, but I still think it's related to use they, them, even when hearing someone's name. Right? Until he knows what their pronouns are. Right? And we can question, like there are people have different opinions about that as well. But what I like about it is that it is that cognitive exercise of not automatically attaching a pronoun to a prompt.
Yeah.
Right. That's doing that work. I will also, when I am talking to somebody and I'm feeling shaky about their pronouns, I will repeat their pronouns in my mind a little bit before I talk to them. Essentially, I'm going to take that little like electrical charge that wants to go down the like well-worn neurological path and just nudge it down the right path. Just nudge it. Just say it in my mind a couple of times. Right. It's amazing how much that helps. And now I do it for cis people too. I do it for everybody.
Yeah.
And like, I honestly, I consider it a sacred moment of acknowledging the person who is there with me. Like I've actually come to love it And I do actually understand, though, why people are like, that's work. And I don't want to do work. None of us wants to do work.
Yeah. I'll speak to a little bit about the work. I think whatever you have to do when you reach a point in your life where you're having to do that work, however you can come up with a way to practice it is a great thing. You might think it's a little silly, but it's gonna help. So like, what? Like, don't care that it's silly. And I'm thinking here about my own like period where I was contemplating social transition, and I was imagining asking people to use they, them pronouns. And I would try it out in my own head, like my own internal monologue. And I don't know about you, but like when I'm talking, when I'm thinking in my head, I'm not saying like he did this or they did this, but like I sort of changed my monologue and made a little like more detached so that I could hear what it sounded like to me, to hear myself refer to myself these pronouns, which is ridiculous. Like I'm saying it out loud. I'm like, I don't know that I can really properly explain what I was doing. It felt silly, but it helped.
Yeah, you were being mindful and intentional, right? And we go through our lives not being mindful about other people or about ourselves, our own internal process, right? Like we go through our lives just sort of like using shorthand for the way we understand each other. And that's because we're busy and we're stressed out. And also our brains just naturally want to take shortcuts because our brains are doing 50 billion things at once, right? But what this actually does and demands of us, and this is pronouns in general, but also like people's pronouns, but also they, them, is being mindful of how we address other people, think about other people, our relationship to language. And that is a really awesome thing. Like that is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a great thing. Like I said, like it feels like a sacred thing. So like that internal monologue, which by the way, I think like really meaningful, sacred, or however you want to put it, things often feel silly at first. That internal monologue was actually a beautiful moment of mindfulness.
Yeah. I wouldn't have connected to mindfulness practice, but you're completely right. I didn't have that vocabulary for what, but it was a similar practice.
And I will say, I feel so much closer to people when I take that moment with them. When I take that moment, I think, it is a moment of honoring the other person in my mind before I interact with that person, which I think makes me better in the way that I interact with people than I would otherwise have been.
Yeah. Completely agree.
Yeah. So I guess like if I'm going to use a metaphor for who's afraid of the big bad they, it's sort of like you look at a big hike and you go, oh my God, this is going to exhaust me. This is so much work. And then you start the hike and it's gorgeous. And you get to the peak of the mountain and it's beautiful. And you're so glad that you did it. And I really think that working on changing language and changing the way we work with other people around language is like getting to the peak of that mountain and seeing something beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of party anxiety. You know, do I really want to go to this party? Oh,
yes.
Am I going to know people there? Oh, maybe I'm going to say the wrong thing. And then if you drag yourself to the party, like, isn't it so joyful and social, and doesn't it feel great, even if some of those things you were anxious about before you went happen?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's something I talk about, like, I think all the time in terms of like working with or being in relationship with people whose experiences are massively different than your own. Like, it's okay to mess up. And getting to a place in your life where you can feel comfortable with those little mistakes that we make socially, like all the time, is also like really liberating. It's really wonderful. And like, you know, I work with young people. Language is always evolving. I say the wrong thing. I use the wrong word, you know, I use something that's like out of style, or that's the meaning has changed. Or I'm working with someone who's older and I say queer and that's upsetting to them, whatever, like. And being okay with that is what actually makes my relationships good.
Yeah. I'll say, I think we don't want to underemphasize the way in misgendering someone can be incredibly painful.
True. Very true.
But I think what really helps is to demystify that.
Yeah.
There are many things that we say in conversation to each other where if I make a mistake with a particular person around a particular topic in a particular flashpoint in their life, it can be incredibly painful.
Very true.
And, if I don't take that care on another day with another person, it's simply not going to have that same harmful, unintentional, but deep impact on their life. And I think when we have this fear in our society, specifically around the impact of, oh, what if I misgender that person? Like, I'll be a pariah. They'll get really angry. Like, when we imagine that, we're really continuing to other people who need care taken with their pronouns, because it's just like a lot of other social mistakes we can make, right?
We can hurt other people. And I think you're right. Like, we have to hold two things. And one is being okay with the fact that sometimes we mess up and that even sometimes hurts people. And then we have to repair the relationship. And also, like, knowing that it matters and that it's important work and that it's work that we don't have to dread.
Yeah.
We can actually appreciate. And the idea that we can hurt people, like, really does go back to do the work, because it really matters.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. And we have empirical evidence of that. We have interpersonal evidence of that. And like, every person has had somebody say something hurtful to them at some point. So we also have, all of us, personal evidence of that. So, yeah. Anything else you want to add to this conversation today?
No, I think we've covered a lot, and we've spoken behind the scenes about how this is going to inform some other podcasts that we want to do around the internet and future neopronouns episode. But I love what we've talked about today.
Yeah, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. And yeah, we always are coming up with, like, we want to talk about this. We want to talk about this. So coming down the pipeline for y'all. Yeah, thank you so much. And Chris, anything that you want to say as you're signing out?
No, but thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Psych Out Podcast. For more information on today's subject, information about our charity, or to find our Patreon, check the links below. Join us next time to learn more about the psychology of who we are.
These are difficult times. We know that some of you out there are suffering so much that you might be thinking of ending your life. If you're having thoughts of suicide, please reach out to professionals for help. You can go to an emergency room, call 911, or reach out to the hotlines we have linked in this description below. I know that many of us have had bad experiences in medical settings, but there are people, many people in this field who want you to live. Please reach out for help so that you can find them. We want you around for our next talk.